They handed out glossy plaques and posed for photos, then skipped her name. I'm Clement Harrow, 58, a retired logistics officer who watched that patch on Rowena's shoulder soak in more sun than any medal ever did. Funny how something the size of a coaster can carry silence louder than applause. Ever been in a room where history chose to whisper instead of shout? I was invited, but not expected. I could tell the moment I stepped inside the base auditorium that my presence was out of place. It wasn't the lack of a name badge or the fact that no one greeted me. It was in the glances, quick then held too long, and the slight shifts in posture, as if making room for someone they didn't quite remember asking to join. The room buzzed with pre-ceremony energy. Streamers in Air Force blue dangled from the rafters. Long tables showcased unit memorabilia, shadow boxes of medals, faded black and white photos, folded flags behind glass. There were booths too, one for a charity golf fundraiser, another selling commemorative coins and caps. Staff in dress blues moved between clusters of veterans and civilians, each group self-contained like a school of fish that had never swum together. I found a seat near the rear, away from the stage. From here, I could observe without interfering. That was always the goal: stay invisible, endure the formalities, and leave without incident. Rowena de Lesseps sat 3 rows ahead of me, posture, straight hands resting quietly in her lap. She wore a pressed but plain uniform, no campaign ribbons, no flashy insignia, just the old patch on her left shoulder, a tiny gray-blue chevron stitched with a cryptic call sign and an eagle mid-turn. You wouldn't know what it meant unless you'd been there. Most hadn't. A young lieutenant passed by her, row coffee in hand, slowing as her eyes drifted to Rowena's shoulder. She did a double take and tilted her head. "Cute," she muttered, smirking to herself as she walked away. Rowena didn't flinch. She just adjusted her seatbelt-style purse strap, covering the patch halfway. From across the room, Lieutenant Kelsey Morano moved with deliberate polish. Blonde bun, tight lipstick, pristine tablet in hand, she exuded the kind of charisma headquarters loved, precise, marketable, camera-ready. She laughed just loud enough with a local reporter, clasped hands with a foundation sponsor, and tapped a junior airman's tablet to adjust the slideshow order. All in rhythm, all choreographed. She made her way to our side of the room, her heels sharp against the polished floor. When she spotted Rowena, her smile flickered only for a breath, but the recalibration was instant. "Well, look who made it," Kelsey sang, tilting her head. "Captain de Lesseps, right," Rowena nodded once evenly. "Retired." "Oh, sure, of course," Kelsey replied. Her tone was honeyed. "I almost didn't recognize you without... Well, you're keeping it simple today." She gestured vaguely at the uniform, then leaned closer and tapped 2 fingers gently against the patch on Rowena's shoulder. "That's sweet," she said. "People still wear that." There was a pause, one of those airy silences that stretches just slightly too long, waiting to be filled with the wrong thing. Rowena gave no reply. She didn't shift, didn't smile, didn't even blink faster. But I noticed her thumb slowly begin to rub the edge of the patch, tracing the stitching, like it had texture only she could feel. Kelsey chuckled and turned to the nearby staffers. "Just kidding," she tossed out breezily. "These old support units really loved their badges. Must be nice to be sentimental." A couple of junior officers smiled politely, unsure if they were supposed to laugh. One adjusted his clipboard and glanced toward the exits. Another sipped his water. I thought of stepping forward, saying something, anything, but that wasn't my place. Not yet. Rowena, for her part, simply leaned back against the hard plastic of her folding chair and looked forward. But then, sat just for a moment. Her eyes flicked subtly, but unmistakably, toward the rear of the room. Toward me. Not in recognition. Not quite. It was the kind of look you give when you're scanning for witnesses, when you're measuring who saw what and how much they understood. Her hand moved once lightly smoothing the patch where it had been touched. The laughter faded. The projector clicked on. The stage lights began to hum, warming up for the first speaker. No one said anything more. But I knew even then that something had shifted, that a long dormant ember had been brushed, and it was only a matter of time before the smoke would rise. Rowena didn't flinch when they laughed. That was never her instinct. In 22 years of service, she'd learned to absorb sarcasm like fog against a windshield seen felt and immediately brushed aside. But when she stepped into the restroom down the hall from the auditorium alone for the first time all day and caught her reflection in the wide steel-framed mirror above the sink, she paused. Not out of vanity, not even out of surprise. Just a flicker, her eyes hesitated. Fluorescent light hummed overhead. The tiles beneath her boots were clean, still damp in patches from the last mopping. She reached for the soap pump with practiced movement, then noticed the folded flyer resting near the base of the faucet, half soaked from someone's careless hands. Notable female units in Air Force history, the title read in bold serif font. There were photos nurses and Vietnam pilots from the Gulf War, modern-day tech ops women in tactical helmets. It was tasteful, curated, safe. Her unit wasn't listed. She picked up the flyer and shook off a few drops, then unfolded it fully. Even on the back, there was nothing, just sponsor logos, a QR code, a smiling message from the PR office. Their strength paved the way. We honor them all. Not quite all. Her thumb traced the edge of the page slow and even before folding it back along its crease. She slipped it into the inner lining of her dress blues right beside the patch. The same patch she'd worn during Storm Drill 008 in Kandahar when the radio relays were out. The GPS was misaligned, and 3 tons of medical supplies were drifting farther from the stranded rescue team every hour. It was Rowena who rerouted the convoy using topography printouts and her own gut. She'd penciled a revised path on a diner napkin, handed it to the driver with 3 words, "Trust the sand." They did. The team was saved. No write-up, no medal, just a new dent on her patch where the convoy truck door had caught her shoulder. Her hand drifted toward that dent now, subconsciously. The restroom door creaked open behind her. 2 young women in standard blue uniforms stepped inside, chatting mid-sentence. And she's getting the air commendation on stage. Next week, you mean Lieutenant Morano figures. She's perfect for optics. They laughed lightly. Not cruelly, just thoughtlessly. Rowena didn't move. She kept washing her hands slowly, precisely. The cold water crawled along her knuckles. The soap had a faint lemon scent, one she remembered from base dispensers during inspections back in 2012. She dried with 2 paper towels, folding them first. When she turned to leave, her jacket fell into place like armor. She buttoned it carefully, aligning each button with its corresponding eyelet. Not rushed, not rigid. Ritual. The young women never noticed her. Their conversation shifted to dinner options and off-base plans. One of them reapplied lip gloss in the mirror, the other adjusted her collar. Rowena left silently. Back in the main corridor, the air had changed. Softer now, less full. Most attendees were in the dining hall or waiting outside for the commemorative tour. She slowed near the mock-up for the next day's stage layout. A tall easel displayed a poster titled Featured Veterans and Honorees. Names were listed alphabetically, with small headshots beneath. The space where her name had appeared last month, just below Harrow Clement, was now blank. Not erased, just replaced. In its place, a QR code linked to donate to the General's Vision Fund. Rowena tilted her head, staring for one long beat. No one else seemed to notice. A janitor walked by humming softly, wheeling a bin of paper cups. The moment passed like a breeze across her shoulder. She reached into her jacket again and pressed her hand flat over the patch, not to hide it, just to feel it there. I spotted her before she saw me standing behind the rusted bleachers near the edge of the old parade field, eyes trained on the horizon, like she was waiting for cover fire that wouldn't come. The sun had dipped low, casting long orange shadows across the cracked asphalt. A slight evening breeze kicked up swirls of dust and the faint scent of worn rubber from the plastic folding chairs still aligned in military rows. The field was quiet now, emptied of the daytime crowd. Only a few silhouettes remained in motion, tech crew checking lights, a photographer adjusting a tripod, and on stage Kelsey Morano rehearsing something with a media handler mic, clipped to her lapel expression, all angles and confidence. Rowena stood, as if separated from it all by a pane of soundless glass. Her hands were clasped in front of her elbows, stiff shoulders squared. But I noticed a tiny detail, her fingers subtly shifting against each other, a nearly imperceptible tremble she kept hidden with practiced grace. She never used to fidget. I walked slowly toward her, letting my steps crunch gently over the gravel. She heard me, of course. Rowena always heard before she saw. "Clement," she said when I was close enough. A nod. No smile. I matched her posture, keeping a polite half-step distance. The field in front of us stretched quiet and wide, the kind of space that made people feel either free or exposed. We stood like that for a moment, both watching nothing in particular. The evening light turned the tops of the chairs gold. A single program brochure drifted along the ground before catching on a chair leg. The kind of moment you don't speak into unless you mean it. So I did. I wrote them a letter, I said, reaching into my jacket. I took out the envelope, white, sealed with a faint curve at the corner from the way it had rested in my breast pocket all afternoon. For the event committee. About you. She didn't look at the envelope. Instead, her gaze remained forward, steady. "I'm not looking for a correction," she murmured. "They know what they're doing. Sometimes they forget," I said. "Sometimes forgetting is worse." I offered the envelope again. She took it, not to read, just to hold. Then she set it gently on the folding chair beside us. The breeze teased at the flap, but it stayed put. She finally looked at me. Her eyes were tired, not from age, but from endurance. "What's in it? The truth," I said. "But you don't have to open it. Just know it's there if you need it." A slight nod. We lapsed into silence again. Far off, a speaker crackled and Kelsey's voice rang across the airfield in stilted rehearsal, and we honor the heroes, both visible and unseen. Rowena didn't react. "You heard Bryant might show?" I asked after a pause. That earned a flicker. Her brow rose just barely. "He's retired now," I added. "Civilian contractor in Pensacola. Got wind of the event, said he might make a surprise appearance." Rowena exhaled, not quite a laugh, more, a release of breath with memory folded into it. He always did like entrances. I smiled faintly. "And soft landings." She didn't reply, but the corners of her mouth shifted just enough to show she was still listening. We stood that way a while longer. The air grew cooler, pressing the day down into something smaller, more manageable. Then I said, almost offhandedly, "No one salutes for logistics until they run out of fuel." That made her turn slow and deliberate. Her eyes met mine, not sharp, but clear. "That's why we don't wait for applause," she said. There it was, the line only someone who'd lived the silence could say. From the side path near the bleachers, A uniformed driver came into view, carrying a plastic storage box. The lid was half open, revealing neat rows of badges in zip sleeves, printed names, laminated barcodes, a small VIP sticker in gold ink. As he passed by, I caught a glimpse of the stack. I didn't see her name. I was sure she saw the same. The driver disappeared behind the backstage stairs. Rowena reached over and steadied the envelope with a fingertip as the wind shifted again. The corner had begun to curl. She didn't pick it up. The next morning began with coffee gone stale by the first sip and the low hum of screen projectors flickering to life in the base command conference room. Rowena wasn't on the schedule. Her name wasn't in the printed itinerary, nor in the welcome email, nor on the script lying neatly stacked beside the podium. Neither was her patch. The chairs were filled with uniformed officers, admin staff, a few PR contractors adjusting headsets and clickers. Kelsey Morano stood at the head of the room, crisp in her updated blues smile already in place. She flicked the clicker like a conductor leading a silent overture slide after slide full of vibrant graphics, mission statements, names of contributors, old unit photos all polished to a shine. And then she spoke. "We want this to feel like a living tribute," Kelsey said brightly, voice bouncing off the walls. "Something that tells today's airmen this is your legacy and your future." No one noticed Rowena slip into the back row. She didn't ask to be there. She didn't need to. She simply walked in and took a seat between a logistics captain and a civilian catering liaison who didn't even blink. Up front, Kelsey kept going. "We've selected footage for the tribute video carefully," she said, pausing to click again. A preview began to play grainy home footage of squadrons from the 80s, a montage of desert deployments, wide-angle shots of award ceremonies. Every command group was there except one, Rowena's. No 31st Quiet Echo, no storm drills, no dusty medical evac units routing through terrain maps by flashlight. Kelsey turned back to the crowd. "Some legacy units, while admirable, simply don't resonate with today's mission image," she said. Then she smiled wider. "We felt it was more inclusive to spotlight the roles with enduring relevance. Our comms team made that call unanimously." The coffee in the room had grown cold. Someone shifted uncomfortably. A pen clicked twice near the front. Rowena didn't speak. Her hands rested on her lap, motionless. From where I sat, 3 rows back, I could just barely see her shoulders squared and still like the spine of a mountain refusing erosion. Then Kelsey said it, lightly, like tossing a handkerchief into the air. "That little patch never made it into the comms plan." No offense. She held up a mock plaque, the kind they'd be giving to commemorated units later that week. Polished brass, elegant script. Except this one had a faint discoloration, where a nameplate had clearly been removed. "I believe this was updated," Kelsey added casually, turning it toward the screen. "We had to reallocate the slot." Protocol. The room was quiet. A coffee ring had formed beneath someone's mug near the front. The projector paused mid-slide with a dull click. Dust particles floated across the beam of light like tiny ghosts. No one moved to fill the silence. Rowena didn't look away. She didn't blink or clench her jaw or lift her chin defiantly. She simply reached into her inner jacket pocket slowly, deliberately, and pressed her hand flat over the patch stitched there. The gesture was so quiet, so intentional, it made more noise than a slammed fist would have. Then the door opened. It wasn't a dramatic entrance. No loud greeting, no stomping boots. Just the sound of the door hinge creaking as an older man stepped inside, silver-haired, lean, but not frail uniform, still crisp despite retirement. He walked with a calm weight to his movements, and though he didn't say a word, the temperature in the room shifted. I recognized him instantly. Lieutenant General Bryant. He scanned the room once slow, unhurried, and his eyes landed on Rowena. Her gaze didn't change, but her fingers lifted from the patch. The plaque was still on display, blank and polished. The slide still frozen behind it. The air still holding its breath. By 11 a.m., the sun had turned sharp, not warm, and the brass edges of the stage fixtures reflected it like signal mirrors. The main parade ground filled with civilians in summer hats, officers adjusting creased lapels, cadets trying not to squint in the light. The smell of dust and gunmetal polish settled between the flagpoles. Rowena sat in the third row. Her name wasn't on the program. I had scanned every line of it earlier, listed MCs, honorees, retired generals, but no mention of her. She hadn't asked for a seat. She'd just walked with calm resolve to where no one dared say she didn't belong. From the rear aisle I had a clear view. She was still as stone, her uniform pressed with the sort of discipline that doesn't fade with retirement. The patch on her shoulder, muted green and deep gray stitching, caught the breeze as the color guard raised the flag behind the stage. Kelsey Morano stood under the canopy of microphones, ringed by live feed cameras. Her smile had not cracked since the ceremony began, and her posture was perfect, award nomination, perfect, Times photo, perfect. Then the announcer called out, "Keynote address, Lieutenant General Emory Bryant, USAF, retired." Applause. Measured. Respectful. Bryant walked up the steps with the kind of stride that doesn't try to prove anything. He adjusted the mic, once glanced at the rows before him, and began with what everyone expected. 75 years of dedication, of sacrifice, of progress, he said. Names that built this foundation. Names etched in stone. Names remembered on plaques. It was polished, predictable, until it wasn't. Bryant paused. A long, intentional breath filled the microphone. He looked out not at the press box or the major donors, not even at the command staff. He looked directly at Rowena, then at her shoulder. I saw a ripple move across the front row. Small shifts of posture, subtle curiosity. The breeze chose that moment to lift the hem of Rowena's patch, gently, just enough to show the underside, stitching the old unit mark still unstandardized, hand-trimmed. Bryant spoke again, but his voice dropped in tone. It wasn't for the crowd now. It was for the moment. Some legacies aren't in the brochure, he said, but they're in the bloodline of every survivor. No rustle, no cough, not even a camera click. Bryant stepped down from the podium. He didn't break stride, didn't ask permission. He walked slowly through the center aisle, cadets parting for him without being told. He stopped directly in front of Rowena. The crowd seemed to lean forward without moving. He straightened, then raised his right hand in a full, precise salute, not to her rank or her face, to the patch. He held it. 1 beat, 2, then dropped it with a nod. It was the kind of salute you reserve for something irreplaceable. Not formal, not performative. True. Cameras caught it from 4 angles. One panned directly to Kelsey's expression, which had frozen mid-smile. Her hand hovered near the clicker, but didn't move. Bryant turned to the crowd. "Captain Delaceps," he said clearly, "saved my flight team in Kandahar 2009. I don't wear this star without that patch." There it was. Not in a footnote. Not in a debriefing. Spoken aloud, before an entire base and a dozen live feeds. Not a favor, just a fact. I saw a few heads turn. Some clapped, unsure. Most just stayed silent, watching the space between Bryant and Rowena. She hadn't moved once. Then slowly she rose, her posture unchanged, expression unreadable. But the eyes, they were no longer the quiet scan of Chapter 1. They were fixed now, unwavering. She didn't return the salute. Instead, she reached up, fingers brushing the edge of the patch. She unpinned it, not torn, not folded, and held it in her palm. No words. Only the breeze, the soft rustle of her silk blues, and the faint mechanical whir of a camera lens finding focus. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The wind moved gently through the parade ground, like it had received instructions to hush. Even the flags seemed to hold their fabric tighter, waiting. Bryant had just stepped back. The air still trembled faintly with the weight of his words, and the silence in their wake was louder than any applause could have been. Rowena remained standing. No shift of the heel, no searching glance. Her posture, quietly anchored, held the eyes of everyone present. I watched from the edge near the rear risers, the sun now angled high enough to frame her in light. There was no spotlight yet, somehow she seemed lit from within. Then she moved. Slowly, she turned toward Bryant. The patch still in her left hand caught the breeze again, just enough to flick one of its corners skyward. She stepped forward, not toward the stage, not toward the press, but toward him. Bryant met her halfway. No medals between them, no titles spoken aloud. She looked him in the eye. "It's done its part," she said, voice steady. "Maybe now it can rest." The words weren't ceremonial. They were release, like setting a flag down at sunset after it's flown for too long. She reached out and placed the patch in his calloused hand. No plastic case, no gloves. Just the fabric, time-worn and curved from decades of service, resting in his palm. Kelsey stepped forward a half step. Her clipboard trembled slightly. "Captain." "This wasn't on the run of show," she said, voice pitched slightly too high. Bryant didn't look at her. Instead, he raised the patch in one hand, his elbow locked like during the old parade reviews. He turned to the crowd. "This," he said, "will be preserved in our Heritage Hall, so the next generation sees what quiet looks like." The crowd didn't clap. They stood, all of them. A reverent hush expanded across the tarmac. Civilians reached for hats. Cadets straightened shoulders. An old man 2 rows in front of me wiped his cheek as though the sun had stung it. Kelsey backed up her face, a portrait of frozen diplomacy. Bryant nodded once and walked off the stage, the patch still in hand. But I didn't follow him. My eyes stayed on Rowena. She turned, walked down the steps of the stage, not hurried, not slow. Her shoes tapped once on each wooden plank. The hollow sound echoed upward, sharper than it had any right to be. As she passed the edge of the stage, cameras rotated toward her. Microphones tilted like flowers following light. She didn't stop for any of them. One of the junior officers stepped forward, notepad in hand. "Captain Deliceps, do you?" But she passed by, her gaze fixed straight ahead. When she reached the edge of the parade ground, she paused. The wind came back just then, lifting the end of her sleeve, fluttering the edge of her hair. She turned slightly, just enough to catch it, and gave the breeze the smallest nod. Like she recognized it. Like it too had been waiting to carry something away. And then she left. A week later, I sat in Rowena's living room, cradling a mug of tea that had long passed the polite threshold of bitterness. The air in the house was quiet. Not the heavy kind that waits for something to happen, but the settled kind, like a field after harvest, still marked with the shape of what once stood tall. The blinds were half drawn. Dust hovered in a sunbeam like it had earned its right to linger. Across from me, Rowena sat with her legs tucked under her back against the arm of the couch. She wore a soft gray sweater I didn't recognize and socks that didn't match. There was no patch now. Just a woman in her home where the only uniform was comfort. On the mantel behind her, a small wooden frame caught the light. I leaned slightly forward. It wasn't a photo, just a clean white rectangle with a printed description. Textile Operational Unit Identifier. Quiet Echo 31st. Retired. Below that, the museum's name and accession number. Not an award, a label, a bookmark in history. We didn't talk for a while, just sipped tea and listened to the soft click of her wall fan rotating back and forth like it was trying to make up its mind. Finally, she broke the silence. "I got this yesterday," she said, sliding an envelope across the coffee table. I opened it. Inside was a note written in the tall, slanted script of someone who hadn't used pen and paper in a while. "Dear Captain Deliceps, I didn't know who you were until last week. Now I can't stop seeing pieces of you in the systems I run. Thank you for being invisible so we didn't have to be. First Lieutenant Hamin Gwyn, Logistics Control Officer Shaw, AFB." Rowena didn't smile, but something softened at the corner of her eyes, like the edge of a crease loosening after years of being folded. "You kept that one?" I asked. "I don't keep many," she said. "But this one didn't ask for anything." I nodded, reaching down to the small bag I'd brought with me. I opened it, careful not to crush the paper corners, and took out the shadow box. Inside was the twin of her patch, not the one Bryant had held, not the original that had seen more sand and storms than most men's boots, but a sister, embroidered the same, edges frayed just enough to prove it had been worn. Bryant had found it in storage and had it mounted black velvet backing a small brass plaque underneath. I handed it to her without words. She turned it in her hands, let her fingers trace the outline like a river she'd once crossed. Then without ceremony, she stood and placed it gently on the shelf beside the lavender bundle. Dried, still fragrant. The same kind she used to put in her footlocker, she once told me, so her gear wouldn't smell like oil and regret. No metals nearby. Just the patch. And the tag. And the lavender. That patch, she said, still looking at it, weighed nothing. But it carried everything they didn't want to. I didn't speak. Some statements don't invite comment. They're complete. We sat a while longer. The tea had gone cold and I didn't care. Eventually she leaned forward and opened a drawer under the TV stand. It creaked slightly. She reached in, pulled out a folder, yellowed edges, dog-eared the label, handwritten in faded marker. "What's that?" I asked. She set it on the coffee table. "I'm not done mentoring yet," she said. I glanced down. The label read, "Tactical Logistics Modules, Historical Archives and Training Notes." There were sticky tabs in 3 colors and a note taped to the front. "Start with Lesson 4, Fuel Chains and Ghost Convoys." I wasn't meant to speak at the dedication. My name wasn't on the program, and I hadn't asked to be added. But they called it anyway. "Mr. Clement Harrow, if you'd come up, please." I hesitated just long enough for the request to feel sincere. Then I stood, buttoned my blazer, and walked up the short steps to the podium. The hall was quieter than I expected for a dedication. The air had the soft thrum of respectful waiting. Rows of uniforms and civilian jackets, heads turned forward, hands resting on laps. No fidgeting, no tapping shoes. Just breath and presence. Behind the podium, the exhibit wall curved inward like a chapel apse, and at its center, framed in velvet, lit from beneath like a relic, the patch. That patch. The edges curled ever so slightly from age, the embroidery dulled just enough to prove it had once moved through real air, not just ideas. Next to it, a small bronze plaque, for every unsung, dedicated to Captain Rowena Deliceps and the Quiet Echo 31st. May silence never be mistaken for absence. I cleared my throat once more to buy time than to need it. Then I unfolded the letter. It was Rowena's handwriting, precise, slanted right like a marching formation in motion. Silence is a sound. It just waits for someone to hear it. In every convoy I led, every reroute I issued, every night, I went unseen. I wasn't looking for thanks. I was making space for someone else to survive. The only legacy I ever wanted was one that didn't need my name to breathe. But if this patch must speak, let it tell you this: quiet doesn't mean small, and invisible doesn't mean unworthy. R.D. I looked up, and in the third row, a young officer was wiping her cheek. I recognized her logistics cadre recent graduate. She stood out for her sharp posture during the entrance procession. Later, she'd tell me her mother had been airlifted during the Kandahar floods in '08. Rowena's convoy had paved the route that made that possible. She never knew the name until today. In the back of the hall, Bryant stood at ease, one hand over his heart. His head bowed not ceremonially, but like someone listening to a hymn they hadn't heard since they were young. Kelsey wasn't there. No official reason given. None needed. I stepped down from the podium without fanfare. No applause followed. And that oddly felt perfect. Instead, the room stood. Not in some loud, clattering way, just stood. As if to match the patch's stillness with their own. Rowena wasn't there either. But her absence filled the hall like a known presence, like someone who had made enough space for others and finally let herself rest. I didn't linger. As the crowd began to move, voices rising in low conversation, I made my way toward the exit, my hands folded behind my back. At the threshold, I paused. The exhibit was still visible through the reflection in the glass door. The patch, so small, seemed to catch the light from an unseen source. No spotlight pointed directly at it, and yet it shimmered, like polished armor, like something still guarding. I nodded once, not to anyone in particular, and stepped into the open air. The sunlight hit the museum glass just right that morning. The patch, quiet and still, reflected it, like something freshly polished, not for battle but for remembrance. Sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones that never ask to speak. Rowena didn't chase recognition. She carved out space so others could stand. Dignity isn't always loud, it just endures. These days, when I walk past the exhibit, I don't salute. I simply nod. That feels enough. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? I'd love to hear your story or your silence. Feel free to share it in the comments or subscribe if these echoes speak to you.